Our next presenters are Brian Gold and Seth Kramer. Brian Gold is a natural resource specialist with the Lead and Copper Monitoring Team in the Drinking Water Standards section. He has a BS in Wildlife Biology and an MS in Wildlife Ecology, both from Texas State University. Brian has worked for TCEQ since 2022. His duties include determining system compliance with water quality parameter requirements and other programmatic needs. Woohoo! Thank you. Good over, Brian. Awesome. And Seth Kramer leads the Lead and Copper Monitoring Team at the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality's Water Supply Division. His past work includes developing and implementing the voluntary lead testing in school and child care program. He also served as a compliance officer for the Lead and Copper Rule. Seth has a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a certification in Environmental Technologies. Please welcome Brian Gold and Seth Kramer.
I'm excited to have you all here today. Thanks for coming out. It's a great opportunity to be here with you all. I always appreciate it. As you can see, the presentation title right from the top is the Lead and Copper Rules, plural. So I'm sure many of you are aware of the fact that we do have a couple of rules in play right now, and that is specifically what we're going to be talking about today, is the current rules and regulations that you are required to adhere to at this time. We aren't going to talk a whole lot about the Lead and Copper Rule improvements, which is going to be, it's in effect October 16, 2024, but the compliance date for that rule is November 1st of 2027. So we'll be kind of sticking with the basics here today for folks that need to know about what we're actually supposed to be doing right now in 2025. So today's presentation, we're going to cover a little bit about those rules, a timeline, so I can kind of talk to you all. Some of you may not be familiar with this, kind of how they're overlapping and intersecting. And then we'll discuss the purpose of our presentation today, why we're up here, what we're trying to convey to you. A little bit about who, what, and why that Lead and Copper Rule affects, and just some general information about the types of monitoring and reporting activities that folks have to adhere to. And then we'll talk a bit about the potential problems with Lead and Copper, the rule itself, and being able to adhere to it and comply, and some of the outcomes and solutions. So starting with your timeline, the most important part of this slide, I think we could look at the very bottom there. The rules get proposed, right? And then they go through a series of reviews, and then they'll finally get promulgated or finalized. At that point, they'll be published to the Federal Register. And even though a rule has been finalized, the compliance date for it is 3 years down the road. So that can be confusing at times. So looking at the top promulgation date there, you can see the current Lead and Copper Rule from 1991, and then some revisions all the way up to 2007. And then in 2021, the Lead and Copper Rule revisions, or LCRR, they promulgated, and their effective date was October 16th of last year, which I hope most of you know. If not, we'll cover some of that. And then you look at the promulgation date for the LCRI. Again, that's a future rule. Its actual compliance date isn't until November 1st, 2027. So it's a little confusing, but I want you to kind of hopefully see some of the overlap there. So right now, our current rules are the original Lead and Copper Rule from 91, and then the Lead and Copper Rule revisions, what remaining provisions, there's only 3 left from that rule, that went into effect last year. So today we want to establish that purpose and the importance of what these lead and copper regulations are for. What is this rule about? We're also going to give an overview of LCR monitoring and some basic monitoring and reporting requirements. We've already kind of, we'll talk a little bit about what the timelines are, kind of how the schedules work. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the, kind of the pitfalls that we run into. Some of the complications that folks are calling us about most frequently, kind of our lessons learned. And so I can share some of that knowledge with y'all to help you have a smooth and easy lead and copper monitoring period. You see how easy that was for me to say? Smooth and easy lead and copper monitoring. Do those two go hand in hand for any of you? They probably don't. They probably don't. So a little bit about who's affected by the lead and copper rule and what your requirements are. There are community water systems and then non-transient, non-community, or NTSC. The non-transient, non-community public water systems are subject to the lead and copper rule. That includes new systems or any existing systems that have been reclassified. So they changed type. You went from a transient system to a community water system or a non-transient, non-community. Now all of a sudden you're subject to the lead and copper rule. The rule itself has, of course, the sampling itself, right? But with that, there's also reporting requirements to the state. And then there's consumer notifications specifically for tap monitoring that goes with that too. And then there are levels that you're looking to maintain and stay within that will affect your sample schedules and the types of activities that you may have to do in the future after you've completed a monitoring period. And the action level exceedance, which very few people actually have to deal with, maybe about 50 a year, are actually having action level exceedances. So you may not know much about this, and it may never affect you, and hopefully it does not. However, the 90th percentile calculation is what you're looking for in an action level exceedance, and if it's above 0.015 milligrams per liter for lead, or above 1.3 milligrams per liter for copper, it triggers additional monitoring and reporting activities, and Brian Gold's going to talk to you more about that as I go through some of the basic tap stuff. So why are we regulating lead and copper? As Hannah said, I started as a compliance officer back in 2017, and it quickly, on the phones, talking to hundreds and hundreds of folks just like yourselves, it quickly became kind of evident to me that this rule seems to be bifurcated on two sort of, the federal government's trying to do two different things with it, right? It's trying to raise awareness about lead and the health effects of lead, which is why a lot of these consumer notices, even information in your CCR, has all been attached to this rule. But at the end of the day, the goal here is to control the levels of lead and copper in drinking water by controlling the corrosivity of the water. This rule is really about controlling water corrosivity. Lead is a hot button topic and issue when people talk about lead and water. It gains a lot of attention. I think sometimes that overshadows the real purpose of this rule. And the purpose of this rule is to determine whether or not you're serving stable water into folks' homes. Because I know you can't control it once it's inside their home, but the more stable it is, the less likelihood it's going to leach metals into it and then sample out in sampling and also when you're drinking it and consuming it. So we talk about lead and copper a lot, and it's often just kind of one of the things that comes up is, we're dealing with lead and it's not that big a problem and nobody has it. And that seems to take away from the overall real purpose here, which is balancing your water chemistry and understanding the corrosivity level of your water. That is the true intent of this rule. And I just want to share that and try and kind of help us all understand that a little better. So initial tap, so you're a new system. We're going to talk mostly about new systems and reclassified systems here. So if you're a new system, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to have to go through an initial round of sampling. If you're a reclassified system, like I mentioned earlier, you would also have to go through an initial round of sampling. In order to become what's called deemed for optimal corrosion control, every water system has to collect 2 6-month consecutive monitoring periods of lead and copper tap samples that are below the action level. And then all new and reclassified systems also have 1 annual round of water quality parameter sampling. So for lead and copper, those samples have to be collected from pre-approved sites. This is something that's very important to make sure you understand that you need those sites selected before you sample. And then your sample count, the number you're going to select is based on population. And again, I mentioned that you will start with the 2 consecutive 6 months. With water quality parameter sampling, this is distribution sampling and entry point sampling. And so a newer reclassified system will collect not only from in the distribution system, and so you know, sample sites in the distribution system for water quality parameters, we often recommend that would be a bacteriological site is perfectly fine, or any other sampling station that you may have out there. And then the entry point sample, of course, this is a very different sample too, because these are full flush samples you'll take from each active entry point. Again, the number that you collect is also based on population. And then that annual schedule for WQP for any initial new system is an entire 1-year period in which you can sample in it. We'll talk more about some of the seasonality that occurs in other schedules, but this is what a new system or a reclassified system should expect to have to deal with the first year in which they're active as a system. So one of the things that definitely slows some people down and can cause violations sometimes, and we try our best to hope that it doesn't end up that way, we'll do everything we can to work with you as fast as we can to get sites approved if you haven't gone and gotten some of those done before you've gone out and sampled. But most importantly, it's really important to understand that your sample sites must already be selected before you go out and sample. And you want to make sure that those sample sites are available to you in your monitoring plan. And those sites are based on a tiering structure, tier 1 being the most highest risk for lead. So for instance, that's a place, community water system that may have a lead service line. It might have connectors that are made of lead, or copper pipes with lead solder between 1982 and 1988, right? So a single family home, that's your preferred site. That's the site you want to sample from the most, because they're going to give you the best characteristics of metals that might be coming out when your water is sitting inside those pipes, and that's going to help you indicate whether or not you need to adjust your corrosion control. Those are all taken care of on Form 20467, and you will have those approved beforehand, as I'd mentioned. Even though you have approved sites, the one thing you want to make sure that you're working with is oftentimes you're going to have a homeowner do the collection for you, or a business owner is collecting on their own. Some folks have service agreements. They go on site and they do collect for them. It kind of works out however you manage that within your community. But it's very important, because we've come up across this numbers of times where we want to make sure we're collecting from sites where people would most frequently consume water. The kitchen has got to be one of those #1 sites, but then also bathroom faucets. What we don't want is to be collecting from garage cleaning sinks, hose bibs, right? Outside of your house, exterior hose bibs. In buildings or non-transients, that would be janitors' closets, things of that nature, right? So a water fountain in a school or a water fountain in a business, that's an excellent site. A kitchen sink, a break room, your own personal kitchen sink, that's a great site. Folks, when you collect from sites that aren't potable water sites like this, it often always causes some problems for people. The lead levels in hose bibs is always high, and it's always high in janitors' closets too. So it's very important that you make sure that the person who's collecting for you did actually indicate that they're collecting from a kitchen sink, which is why you want a homeowner's collection form. You want some documentation if a homeowner is collecting for you, so that they can indicate not only that they had the proper stagnancy time, that they haven't made any adjustments to their personal plumbing since the last time they sampled for you, or you are aware of their type of plumbing materials and the faucets that are in there. For example, we had a homeowner one time really liked this antique faucet that they found from the 1920s, and so they took out their new faucet and they installed their 1920s faucet, and suddenly the water system had this incredibly high lead level that they'd never had over the course of probably 7-8 sampling rounds. I don't remember exactly, but it was so clearly elevated, and we asked what changed, what happened. We found out they put an antique faucet. Well, back in the 20s, there was no such thing as lead-free. It absorbed all the lead right in the water. We don't want to collect from that type of faucet, because that's not really representative of what you normally should have. And in fact, in that situation, you want to inform your customers of the sources of lead, right? You want to make sure they're aware of where these sources of lead are, so they understand that that was not a very good move for their own personal health too. So with that, also, you don't collect from any places that have point of entry, such as RO systems or point of use filtration. Something, on the tap itself, you would want to remove that, because we want to understand the corrosivity characteristics without pre-filtering out lead or copper or any other metals for that matter. And then in a situation where every single site in your community is nothing but water softeners, in that case, you will be collecting from water softeners, because then they truly are representative of the sites in your community. So it is important to understand these sampling locations. This does cause problems for people. Hopefully it won't be causing any trouble for y'all, and hopefully you have a better understanding of why it's very important to make sure we collect from kitchen and bathroom sinks exclusively. In fact, the new lead and copper rule improvements, which I said I wasn't going to talk about much, they very specifically specify that now in the rule, because they've seen the challenges that have occurred. Once you've collected the samples and you picked them up, they do need to all go to an accredited laboratory. On here's just a little clip of what our monitoring form looks like. This is our chain of custody or monitoring form that you would utilize on those tap samples. make sure that that information is filled out correctly too. This is something that can cause challenges for folks, especially if you're towards the end of a monitoring period and it turns out you need monitoring form corrections or something's gone wrong. You're going to be very pinched for time, and these type of things can lead to monitoring violations when we can't get them corrected quickly enough. So with that, something I hadn't mentioned already, which is sample early. Sample early. If your monitoring period starts on Jan 1 and ends June 30th, then you want to start getting out there and reaching out to your customers immediately and sample as fast as you can. Don't wait until June to do it. Just because the monitoring period ends, that shouldn't be your deadline for completing sampling. You'll find yourself in a number of different challenges when you do that, and one of them is lab capacity. Because the laboratories, and I'll move to the next slide, I think we'll be touching on that. The laboratories have to report that data to us within the 10 days after the end of the monitoring period. And Brian's going to show you some slides here later that give you an idea of how many people sample in those final months and how many of the samples are analyzed in those final months within that 10 days. And it is tight. And when complications arise, this is where folks who have been doing a great job, doing everything right, they sampled correctly, they worked with their community. I mean, everything was done fine. There's nothing wrong with their results, but you end up with a reporting problem that then can create a violation for you. And that is really tough for all of us. All of us, us included. We deeply regret when these type of things happen to folks. Or let's say a local lab ships the samples off to a lab in Florida or somewhere else where they're working with an affiliated lab, and those bottles get lost in transit. There's no time to recollect. There's no time to replace that, and then you as a water system end up liable for that situation. So these are some of the lessons learned, right? Some of the possible downfalls of waiting until that last minute. So like I say to people sometimes, you don't want to wait until Christmas Eve to go shopping. You show out on Christmas Eve and you're like, why isn't there anything on the shelves? I don't understand. I couldn't buy anything. Well, you didn't want to wait until Christmas Eve to shop for Christmas. You want to get out there ahead of time so that you can make sure that things are available to you. And it's very similar here. Don't make that your deadline at the end of a monitoring period. As I mentioned earlier, those 90th percentile values may trigger additional requirements. Once your laboratory results are in, you will notify your customers who sampled for you utilizing the lead consumer notice. That's one thing that all water systems will be doing. Once you've completed those 2 consecutive 6-month TAP monitoring periods, you have the opportunity to move to reduced monitoring if you came in below the action level exceedance. So in terms of how the schedules work, for the reduced TAP monitoring, because I already talked about the initial monitoring, the 6-month periods, the reduced TAP monitoring is either going to be an annual or a triennial. So here's something for a lot of folks to maybe kind of understand too. I received a lot of calls. We all still receive calls. Hey, I've been on a 3-year schedule for the last 15 years. Why am I sampling on a 1-year? Well, I'll get to that because there's another level that triggers your annual or your triennial schedule. And so there's often a misconception that your schedule remains the same. And I want to really get that through today, that just because you were on a 3-year schedule before doesn't mean you're going to stay on a 3-year schedule. So it's important to keep up with what your results were and know that your schedule can change. And then a 6-month monitoring periods, of course, would happen if you were over that action level exceedance. That also leads you down a whole different pathway, again, that Brian's going to talk about more. And I'm going to let Brian take over right now on the ALE.
Thank you, Seth. Good afternoon. So let's say you're a public water system and you've taken your lead and copper tap samples and you get your lab results back and you find out that you've exceeded the 90th percentile value for lead or copper. So that's excluding the top 10% of your results. If you've received an ALE or your 90th percentile results are showing that you've exceeded the action level, that sets off a chain of events that we like to call the ALE highway. So please note that's not in the rule. That's just something that we like using to help explain the situation that you're in. And just visually, it's a nice way to look at everything. So looking at the ALE highway activities, on here I don't have included, what I will talk about later, about the 24-hour Tier 1 notice that's now required. But There's WQP monitoring in the entry points and in the distribution system. Lead and copper tap monitoring, that's going to be done in your distribution system like you would normally do. However, you also have source water samples that are going to be taken at your active entry points. You have a lead consumer notice that you should be used to doing that with your lead and copper tap sampling. But in addition, you have a lead public education that's required to be given to your customers. So that's information about the results, information about the health effects of lead, and information about what the water system is doing about this action level exceedance. You'll have an optimal corrosion control and source water treatment forms that are required to be completed and turned in. And then a corrosion control study is conducted. That corrosion control study is reviewed by TCEQ, and then once that's approved, the system will install the corrosion control treatment. After some additional sampling, the system will recommend optimal water quality parameters, and then once those are approved, the system will operate continuously under those optimal water quality parameters, and I will discuss that a little bit later. So let's take a look at an infographic. So this is available on our website if you like this. If you're a visual learner and you don't like looking at blocks of text, how many of us do? This is a little outdated. It doesn't have the 24-hour Tier 1 customer notice, but start off at the beginning and you've got your action level exceedance, and then that kicks off your water quality parameter monitoring in your distribution system and entry points. And you'll see these yellow circles. You've got timestamps where you're conducting things that are due within the first 30 days, first 60 days, 6 months after, a year after, 2 years and beyond. Some things worth looking at here, and you don't have to look at all this, but within that first year, you're conducting consecutive 6 months sampling for lead and copper tap sampling. If you've done that and the results are below the action level for both of those 6 months, and you're a small water system, under 50,000 population, and you've never had an action level exceedance before, you have an opportunity, a one-time opportunity to get off the highway and return back to normal lead and copper tap sampling. If you're a large system or you've had multiple action level exceedances, unfortunately, you have to continue to the end where that ends up with those optimal water quality parameters. So what is water quality parameter monitoring and reporting? So Seth talked about it's required for initial monitoring, so that's going to be your new water systems that activate, and that's typically scheduled the calendar year after you activate, and also the calendar year after you would reclassify, so your non-transient, non-community. Those water systems are affected, so if you reclassify from a transient system to an NTNC, that type of thing, you would be conducting that initial monitoring. Also, if you change sources, you add a new source, or you change your long-term treatment, or like I was just saying, after an action level exceedance. So it's a suite of 12 analytes, and they're solely analyzed to determine the corrosivity of your water. There's no formal action level for water quality parameters, so there's no limit you have to worry about hitting or targets or anything. You're collecting these water samples, they're getting analyzed, and it's used solely to determine if your water is corrosive. Like Seth was talking about, that's a primary aspect of the rule. So initial monitoring is done in that first year after you activate, and then you have all year to take those water quality parameter samples. You can take them January 1st, middle of the year, end of the year. All other WQP monitoring is done on a 6-month schedule. So first half of the year, second half of the year, or if you have an action level exceedance during the reduced monitoring periods, that's June, beginning of June to end of September, then you have a June through November 6-month monitoring period. So that sampling, even though it's 6-month monitoring, is split into quarters. So if you're sampling, if you're scheduled for the first half of the year, you have samples that are due in the first quarter and second quarter, second half of the year, third quarter, fourth quarter, and so on. So if you're scheduled, for example, for 4 distribution system samples and 2 entry point samples per active entry point, you're taking 2 distribution and 1 entry point sample per quarter, and just repeating it the next quarter. So water quality parameter monitoring, those samples, you grab your bottles and you bring those again to a TNI accredited laboratory. Use form 20679 to complete that in reporting. So what's different than lead and copper tap monitoring, where you have homeowners taking samples and you're collecting those and bringing those to the lab? Whomever is taking the water quality parameter samples needs to have a TCEQ lab approval before taking those samples, because the field measurements for pH and temperature require that lab approval. Those samples are, and those analyses are treated like a laboratory. So you would, and of course you would want to make sure you do that, get that approval before you're taking your samples. And then like the lead and copper tap samples, those data are due to TCEQ within 10 days at the end of the monitoring period. So what are optimal water quality parameters? So I talked about that a little bit on the ALE highway. So those are a subset of those 12 analytes. They are approved by TCEQ, like from the end of the ALE highway, or if you're a large water system over 50,000, if you've ever exceeded the PQL, that's 0.005 milligrams per liter, you would also have to operate under optimal water quality parameters. So OWQPs, those ranges are recommended by the water system, and then once those are approved by TCEQ, that is continuous quarterly monitoring of the distribution system and biweekly entry point monitoring. The lab approval that I talked about for field measurements also applies to OWQPs. So if you're taking anything other than pH and temperature and you want to do that yourself, you have to get a lab approval for that. And those are reported on Form 20955. And so the important distinction here is while you're continuously monitoring for those OWQPs, you're reporting your OWQPs to TCEQ during the same monitoring period that you're taking your tap sample. So if you're on a 3-year schedule and you have OWQPs, you're continuously monitoring for those OWQPs, but you're only reporting your results during that 3rd year under your reduced monitoring period. And so the people in here, I don't know, I don't need to see a show of hands, but we're only talking roughly 25 water systems in the entire state that are operating under approved OWQPs. So it's about 0.5% of the systems that fall into the rule. Some potential problems, outcomes, and solutions that we've seen. So if you have monitoring forms that have errors on them, what can happen if you have an error? Well, those samples can get rejected, and potentially that can lead to a violation. You'll see this is a recurring theme. What can we do to avoid that? Well, you can make sure what you're writing down on that monitoring form is accurate, and make sure if you're uncomfortable with that, make sure you're reaching out and figuring out. Ask us if, hey, is this right, before you turn that in. Unapproved PWS labs, so for those OWQPs and WQPs, if you didn't get that lab approval before you took those field measurements, those samples might get rejected and again might lead to a violation. So get the lab approval before you take those samples. And this is a little excerpt from on the WQP monitoring form. There's a box here to check or to put a yes or a no if you already have an existing lab approval on file for taking those pH and temperature measurements. And if you're writing yes and you're comfortable with that, that's fine. If you're writing no or you don't know what this is, you should stop and reach out and figure out, hey, do I have this approval? Some additional problems. So like Seth talked about, late submissions, submitting late in the monitoring period, and complications of the lab. Things break, lab equipment goes down, power outages, hurricanes, things like that. Rejected samples and unaccepted samples, potentially violations can happen. So like Seth had said, take those samples early. Gives you time to take new samples if for some reason those samples need to get rejected. And then tap sample location issues. So that can lead to unaccepted samples and again violations. Potentially an ALE, like Seth had talked about, if you're taking those samples at a site that's not representative of your system. So an outdoor hose bib, an eye wash station, that kind of thing. So solutions are, have those sites approved beforehand and make sure you're sampling from representative sites. So graphically, this is nice to illustrate my point. So last year's reduced monitoring period. This is a bar graph showing the samples that were collected and when they were collected. As you can see, most of the samples are collected in August and September. And then moving on, you can see the samples that were reported to TCEQ from that same monitoring period. If you took the samples late in the monitoring period, they were reported late in the monitoring period. And you can see some of them were even reported after the due date, so those would end up with violations. So what does this mean? It means the labs have a lot to work with. They're trying to get that data to us, but they can be helped by spreading that out throughout the monitoring period. Some tips for successfully monitoring. Plan, so know your schedule. Know when you're supposed to sample. Know how many samples you're supposed to collect, and know your sampling procedures, whether that's TAP or for WQPs. Communicate and coordinate with your homeowners to make sure they understand what they're supposed to be doing for those samples. I'm sure everyone out in here can attest that it's difficult to get homeowners to want to be willing to sample for sometimes. So make sure you're communicating early so you're giving yourself enough time to find replacements if you can't get somebody to take a sample from. Communicate with your labs. Make sure when you're dropping off that bottle, you know that that data is your data. That those labs are there, they're doing that service for you, but they need to be able to hit those timelines, and you need to discuss with them, are they able to hit those timelines? It's a good conversation to have. They're your customer, make them work for you. And third-party collectors for WQPs, for example, make sure they have that approval on file, and you just didn't hire somebody that knows how to put water in a bottle. Reach out. So it's much better to ask us before you've taken that sample and filled out that form and brought it to the lab. Maybe I took that sample from a hose bib in a garage or something, but I think it's probably okay. I'll just hand it off. Call us, email us. We can talk to you and figure it out, and it's much better to fix this problem before it becomes a problem. And then if you are struggling with this, we have resources available. So the TCQ's free financial, managerial, and technical support group and small business local government assistance, those are free resources for public water systems, and they're there to get you in compliance and keep you in compliance. So the three LCRR requirements that Seth had mentioned that are still in effect or that remain from LCRR, I will cover these in a little bit more, but the initial lead service line inventory that everyone's, I'm sure, familiar with. Public notice requirements, so there was the notification of known and potential lead service lines, and then the Tier 1 notice that I talked about with a 24-hour notice for a 90th percentile lead ALE. So you can see the citation from the rule. So the lead service line inventory, all water systems that fall under the rule were supposed to develop an inventory and identify those materials. And then those materials are categorized as lead, galvanizer requiring replacement, which you've heard as GRRs, lead status unknown, and then non-lead lines. So looking at the known or potential lead service line notification, so water systems, whenever they were reporting lead service lines, galvanizer requiring replacement, or lead status unknown lines, were required to notify those customers. That was done through the initial inventory, but also if you are out and you make a service call or you're trying to figure out what those unknown service lines that you've reported, what the classification of those are, if you learn that you now have an unknown line that is now a GRR or a lead service line, you also have to do that notification to your customers. And then last, the 24-hour public notice, Tier 1 notice for lead, specifically lead action level exceedances. And it says here in the citation, it's to be done as soon as practicable, but not later than 24 hours after the public water system learns of the violation or exceedance. And then let's look at some data from the initial lead service line inventory. So this is a few months old. This is from April, late April this year, but the numbers haven't changed that much. So some of the highlights to look at here, most of the states covered. So 97% of the population has been covered by the lead service line inventory. And you can look at the pie chart. Hey, we have mostly non-lead service lines in the state. That's a good thing. But we have over 4,000 lead service lines that were reported so far. And then the total number of GRRs, those are over 100,000 service lines. And look, we've got over 2 million unknowns that have been reported. So as those unknowns are being converted to known materials, some of those are going to be GRRs and some of those are going to be lead. And then the last thing to look at here on the bottom, there's a little timeline showing when we received service line inventories, the initial service line inventories from the water system starting off in May of last year. And you can see it goes along and there are a few blips early on. And then as we approach the October 16, 2024 due date, things got a little crazy. So we got over 1,000, I think, something in that week of October. So everybody was hustling to try to get those in, and we've been still working, and we are still continue to work on getting those initial lead service line inventories accepted. With that, we're going to open up for questions, and just remind everyone, just try, if you have questions related to the presentation, we'd be more than willing to talk with you. If you have questions that are more LCRI or not related specifically to the presentation. Please hold those. You can talk to us in the TA room, give us a call, or shoot us an email. Thank you.
I'm going to pose some questions from the online folks. The first question is, if all service lines are replaced and entire system is new, are we still required to maintain LCR testing?
If all service lines are replaced and the system is all non-lead, is that what the question was?
That it's new,
Okay, that it's a new.
are we still required to maintain LCR testing?
Yes, if the system falls under the lead and copper rule, if the system is a community system or a non-transient, non-community system, you could have lead lines, you could have copper lines, PVC lines, rubber hoses. It doesn't matter. You fall under the rule, and therefore you have to do lead and copper tap sampling.
Okay, I have another question. If an address exceeds for lead because a customer installed an antique fixture inside their home, can the sample result be invalidated?
I'm going to answer that with, I want to see your body of documentation. I want to see the documentation that you had shown had collected from that individual. So here's the real answer to that question. You should have known that before they sampled, because you had talked to them about it and you looked at that homeowner collection form and you had already discussed what the materials were and how the age of their faucets they were collecting from, the age of materials in their home. You already talked about this. So in that case, that shouldn't have become a problem. Now you're asking me whether or not it can be invalidated, and I'm not going to speak to an invalidation, speculating here on a question online. But I would say that if proper documentation is going to be necessary, and I'm talking about from the homeowner to the chain of custody to the laboratory report to the data that we have inside our database, all of this needs to show me a perfect pattern for me to discern that maybe there was something done wrong. And I would say that I would entertain the idea or consider whether or not we would want to invalidate a site like that. But my real answer to you is you should never have probably ended up in that position because you already discovered that ahead of time.
Can you just clarify on the water quality parameters? You said when it was for the initial and then if you exceed the 90% rule, right? So let's say you've passed all those and you're on reduced monitoring every 3 years. How often should we see those water quality parameters come up?
So if you're a water system who you've already done your initials and you're just operating your day-to-day and you're taking your lead and copper tap samples and let's say 3-year schedules, if you don't have an action level exceedance and you don't have a source water or treatment change, you're not taking water quality parameters.
Okay, so the source water treatment change will trigger the water quality
Correct,
parameters?
yeah,
I know we said the lead and copper would reset, but...
Correct, yeah. You can be a normally operating system and not have an action level exceedance, but you just need to change your source, you add a source, that kind of thing, or you change your treatment. That will trigger that initial monitoring again.
Okay, and then can you clarify if we change from chlorine gas to liquid chlorine, is that considered a change in treatment?
Possibly.
Possibly.
I'm not, yeah.
That's a great question. I think typically that type of chlorine conversion, is that what you're speaking of?
Yes.
So that's not really considered a long-term source of treatment. And so the key distinction is long-term on that.
Okay. Yeah. And then one more, if that's okay. So you talked about the notifications after we did the lead service line inventory, within 30 days after submitting. The EPA says it's required to be done every year, but nowhere
Correct.
on TCEQ's website does it talk about re-notifying every year and then reporting that notification to TCEQ every year.
Yeah. It is a requirement, and we will be updating that. I guess I could say we're still kind of working through those initial inventories, so we've been really still focused on getting the initial inventory done.
Okay.
But you're correct. That is a requirement, and it will be a requirement, and we will be updating our website to reflect.
So we don't violate that. Should we be going a year from the date we notified the customers?
You mean like if you submitted your inventory early? And,
Yeah, like we submitted October, and then we
Okay.
had to notify customers within 30 days, right? And then we're getting close to that 1 year. Is it within 1 year of, whatever, let's say we did it the end of October. Do I have to do it again before the end of October of 25?
Yeah, so you're asking like when the clock restarts, that kind of thing?
Yeah.
I don't know. Is it 1 year from us receiving?
It's going to be from the point in which you sent it out the first time. You'd go ahead and set that clock.
Okay. And then hopefully we'll get some guidance on how we report that to you, that we've done that?
Yes, you've already have done it once.
Right.
So it'll just be
The same thing?
the same thing.
Okay. All right, thank you.
So the last online question is, do service line material notification letters need to be sent out this year? I heard that they only need to be sent out this year if an unknown was categorized as GRR or lead. Is that accurate? And what if an unknown is classified as non-lead now?
So if I'll take the last part of it. So if an unknown line is then converted to be a known line that's non-lead, there's no notification requirement. But yes, if any lines that remain unknown or are known to be lead or galvanized requiring replacement have an annual requirement for notification. The TCEQ. Oh, sorry.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate you coming out.
Thank you, everybody.